All right. Hello. Hello. My name is Gabriel from Yonder. I'm here with Simeon, and we're here to talk to you today about boundaryless planning. But let's first introduce ourselves. Simeon, you want to go?
Yes, thank you, Gabriel, and a very warm welcome from my side. Unfortunately, I cannot see you guys, but I do hope that you see me and you hear me loud and clear. So I am Simeon Nachev. I am working for Lenzing AG for the last 5 years. Before that, a little bit to do with the pharmaceuticals. So I tend to be a supply chain professional with strong interest into digital innovations and transformations. And I'm also a fanatic when it comes to, let's say, healthy lifestyle and training. So I tend to go the extra mile, not only at work, but also at my hobbies. So I'm Ironman. I do mountain marathons, both running and also cycling. And not last but not least, my passion is the Rennrad, as we call it here in Austria, or the motorcycle. I met Gabriel 5 years ago. I remember this date like it was yesterday. We were looking for a service provider for our, let's say, newly developed SNOP process. And of course, we got to know the best in class. And at the time, they were named JDA. So that fellow really came to see Lenzing, and then he really took our hearts and minds away with the solution. And of course, with his, let's say, personal qualifications. So Gabriel, please introduce yourself. You have a lot to say.
All right, thanks a lot, Simeon. You're very kind. But I agree. It was very memorable to interact with Lenzing all those years. It's always a great fun, and particularly with you. So yeah, so I'm Gabriel. I look after the solution advisory practice for Blue Yonder in the EMEA region. I'm basically keen on supporting our clients when it comes to laying out the path for a transformation, but I also want to be able to cut that into small pieces that can be achieved quickly and that stand on their own feet from a value realization perspective, so that basically each step along the way has value creation on its own. Been in this space for about 20 years. Always in software. I've done a little bit of consulting, a little bit of sales, but the majority in the solution advisory space. Yeah, from a hobby perspective, it's not as fit as as Leon, so I like to go out and do some fly fishing. So that's the River Socha there in Slovenia, very beautiful area. I also like to do some barbecuing, and as you can see, sometimes that also combines quite nicely those two things. All right, but let's get into it.
Yes, thank you, Gabriel. And just to finish the personal note, let me assure you the guy is doing one of the best barbecues around in Bavaria. So if you're there, just stop by. Yeah, maybe not now with the corona, but soon afterwards. Great. So now let's get to a bit of a serious note. So now we want to start talking about boundaryless planning. Please, all of your, let's say, SNOP guys, IBP guys, be patient with us. We'll tell you why we start with something bigger that reflects to all of us. So perhaps now during Corona, you heard about the nature taking a breath. This was a well-deserved break because for the last 50, 60 years, we were doing everything possible to destroy it. And we don't need NGOs or Greta Thunbergs of the world to show us there is a problem. I think we all experience it in some way or another. So in short, we have a growing global concern about the deforestation, water and air pollution, climate change, waste. And this calls for action. And one of the actions that at least we are after as a Lenzing, as a corporation, but also Blue Yonder is cooperation, but also change in the typical supply chain to go from the linear supply chain to circular economy supply chain. And this is very important for an industry that I'm representing, which is the fashion industry. And Gabriel, if we can go to the next slide. It's an industry that all of us take for granted, and none of us is actually going under the hood what's there. And let me tell you that it takes almost to circle the globe 1 or 2 times for a plain t-shirt that I'm wearing to let's say, be made all the way from the raw material, let's say coming like from Lansing, sustainable fibers, through the different steps of the supply chain, all the way to the garment retailer shops of your preferred brands. And that stages, they of course have associated carbon impact, and unfortunately they have some other nasty, let's say, byproducts associated with them. So no surprise to you that the fashion, the textile industry is the second most polluting out there after the oil and gas. It came to me as a surprise again several years when I was digging into this sustainability matter. But now when we have the data, it's really shocking. If you ask yourself why this is happening, first of all, the clothes are massively underutilized. So on average, yeah, especially if it's about fast fashion, you take a piece of cloth, it's nice, trendy, after several washes, it's out. The material is hardly reused or being recycled. And we're talking about huge waste out there in the whole industry. And very importantly, it's what you do after, let's say, you take you buy your clothes. A lot of the CO2 emissions, a lot of the microplastic is associated with what happens when you wash the clothes, when you dry them out, and when you continue to wear them. So my call here to all of you is be conscious what you buy, how much you buy, and you can do it in a sustainable way. Next slide, please. Yeah, so 10% of the global carbon emissions associated with the fashion and textiles. And if you see on the next slide, 20% of the global wastewater production is associated with our industry. So it's quite important for the well-being. And I'm happy to tell you that Lansing is in sync with the Paris Agreement. So we have a mission to go carbon neutral by 2050. And hopefully to try not to pollute the planet anymore. Next slide, we are making a bridge now a bit to the topic of today about the boundaryless planning. So let me show you the status quo of the fashion industry, where it's pretty much borders at every stop of the supply chain. You see, it's very fragmented, it's very complicated. Average supply chain has 6 to 7 players, and there are many traders in between the steps, so it gets really ambiguous, really intransparent, really hard to control. So if you see here on the very left-hand side, it's where Lansing sits. We're a fiber producer. We're producing, let's say, the ingredients that make ultimately a t-shirt or a jacket or you name it. And then it's released in the supply chain. But we are clueless to what's actually the need of the consumers, because this is being, let's say, governed by the brand and retailers, but of course they're not collaborating. Actually, they don't know who their supply chain partner are. And fun fact, 2 years ago, there was a nice BBC documentary. They questioned several big brands. I will, of course, not disclose the names. They gave them 1 week to tell them the supply chain behind a plain white cotton t-shirt. So only one of them was able to tell the supply chain behind. And we're talking about basic item. It's like evergreen. What about the more complicated ones? The problems associated with this intransparent extended supply chain network are endless. Some of them are mentioned on that slide. And you can, of course, guesstimate why this is happening. I think a common suspect is the type of planning, if any planning is being done. So this is the manual planning or the Excel-based planning. And if we go on the next slide, Gabriel.
Yeah, nice. So if you see these pictures here, you might ask yourself, okay, what does that have now to do with what Simeon was just explaining? But this is probably something many of you have experienced in one form or another at some point in time in your career, or maybe still experiencing, which is the attempt to get ahead of the plans by using manual approaches, which tends to be in Excel, And then, of course, these two, the Rabbit and the Excel spreadsheets, they have something in common, which is the uncontrolled propagation, right? They multiply, and it becomes very, very critical, very, very difficult to manage. And that then, leads to the, the well-known, the famous bullwhip effect, right, Simeon?
Yeah, absolutely, Gabriel. So this is exactly the situation 5 years ago in Lansing, uncontrolled propagation of Excel spreadsheets. Everybody had one, and everybody was trying to connect them, and it was a mess. Total lack of transparency and one version. So now take this problem and extrapolate it in this very fragmented, big supply chain as we have in the fashion. So what you get is bullwhip effect on constant basis, and the last big, let's say, occurrence of this effect was in the midst of the pandemic. So it took us 3 to 4 months after pretty much everything shut down for us to get, let's say, the effect of the slower consumption of the brand and retailers. So that's really demonstrating the bullwhip effect and the needs to share planning information, to collaborate, to try to optimize the supply chain, to drive the waste, and to have clear demand and replenishment signals. This is what we are fighting for with Lansing and Yonder as a technology provider, really to change that industry and the game. I'm sure you know what is really bullwhip effect, and the literature is talking about it in depth, so we will not really go into details of the different, let's say, things like price variation, batching, whatever. You can get this. The next slide, Gabriel, I think it's very important for us to say from business perspective and also from consultant perspective as Yonder, what we see in the market in terms of challenges as is, and in terms of challenges created by Corona, and in terms of challenges that are expected. Gabriel, what's your take on that?
Yeah. No, thanks. And it's trying sort of to extrapolate from the specific situation at Lansing to a more generic view on those challenges. This is just trying to derive or presenting a derivative of that. So one classic problem is if sales and commercial plannings are sort of misaligned. If you have that disconnect between the financial planning and the volume planning, it's no culture or missing culture of getting to consensus, and the lack of problem-solving discipline. And then, as you said, Simeon, COVID comes along, and sort of the expression we have here now is those challenges got squared, if you will, by COVID, because both the demand and the supply side had an uncertainty increase, which is very challenging, which actually amplified that disconnect there between finance and the volume views. And I think the other one I wanted to really pick and highlight real quick is the notion of if a company had a lack of problem-solving discipline, COVID and the pandemic influences actually had an effect on that it really moved from an inconvenience to a matter of survival and being able to stay afloat in the market, because the fog was really very dense, particularly in the early months, but even now. It's we're all more hopeful, and there's more optimism out there. And we were discussing prior to the event here. Maybe next time we're on this event, we'll be actually physically present. So we're all kind of looking forward to that. But yeah, as I said, it's still not the most easy realm to navigate.
Absolutely, Gabriel. And any business out there, especially processing industry like ours, needs to have an answer to the challenges in order to stay afloat. And we in Lansing, we have an answer to the situation. So apart from from sustainability being in our DNA, this is really a corporate belief. This is a personal belief to do well for nature and to do well for business. We also count on our partners along the value chain and our partners in the digital transformation, which is Yonder. So in the next couple of slides, we really talk about our 5-year journey, how we started, where we are today, and how we see the future between us, and how we want really to redefine, we want to fashion a transformation together. So on the next slide, you really see the quick wins that we had by purely breaking the silos within Lansing, by having an S&OP process that was facilitated or put on steroids by the Yonder S&OP module. Quite powerful, cloud-based 24/7 access, one version of the truth, very easy to collaborate, very easy to see where the exceptions lay, so you don't bother the planners with things which are not value adding. So all of that really led to some staggering results for Lenzing. So Lenzing is around 3 billion euro in terms of revenue on yearly basis. So the gains that we get here are really significant for a very small planning community that we have. We have a small central team which is trying to run the show globally. So all the help that you see here, all those real results are actually helping the SNOP and the company to really go one step beyond and one step closer to the IBP. And Gabriel, if we go on the next slide. This is a slide that we took out a bit more in cooperation with Warwick University. It's talking about the need to redefine on to find your own planning process. And it's talking about the need to combine your daily execution, that volatility which is coming now because of Corona and other crises, like this ship that was stuck, for instance, in the Suez Canal. So these disruptions that happen daily, there is a need to reconcile your SNOP plan, your 3 to 18, 24 horizon, whatever you have, with something that is occurring on daily, weekly basis. And last year, when this research was done, already significant percent of the respondees were experiencing this disconnect between SNOP and SNOE, this boundary that exists. And definitely going forward, the trend out there, which is now very much more accelerated, as Gabriel will elucidate later, is to combine those processes into a boundaryless planning, something that goes beyond your typical SNOP process.
Yeah, and in this context, really, I mean, I'm sure many of you have seen many of these sort of frameworks and maturity models around SNOP and IBP, and the philosophy we follow really at Blue Yonder is it's kind of do it by the book, but be the author type thinking, right? So we're not saying pick this one from say Supply Chain Digest, that's the one and only truth. The reality is you can pick and choose from all these models what's really working well for you. And in that sense, be the author of your own process that really fits the sometimes very specific and very unique requirements, as Simeon just laid out for the case of Lenzing, for example. So Simeon already mentioned sort of this transition SNOP to IBP, and I just wanted to touch base on that real quick. Let me first say what's depicted here on the left of the slide is more an observation of what SNOP often is. It's not necessarily the recommendation of what SNOP should be. And what's depicted in the right side of the slide on the IBP column, that's interpreting IBP as an evolution or a higher maturity state of an SNOP process. But I'm sure you'll find some of those distinctions meaningful. So, right, what we often observe in SNOP, it tends to be very volume-oriented, demand and supply balancing type stuff. But a clear indicator of a higher maturity is if it's properly financially integrated, and you have the value-based views just alongside with the volume views, so that you can actually steer the organization towards the financial business objectives. Another distinguishing element we sometimes observe is the notion of IBP looking beyond the four walls, right? Simeon was explaining how far the fashion industry needs to actually look beyond those own four walls. It's a 7-step or six to 7-step supply chain with all sorts of different companies in between, which makes it very, very challenging. Another thing we often observe is that SNOP is being initiated and to some extent driven by the supply chain folks, but technically speaking, it's a business management process, and as such, not necessarily just a supply chain process. So, which is why a higher maturity state is typically then sponsored by, let's say, the exec management, ideally the CEO, and has properly integrated the commercial organizations, the finance organization, the product organization. Having said that, you do need a proper model representation, a proper digital twin of the supply chain in order to support the scenario making and the scenario creation and the quick simulation of what's going to happen in the business going forwards. And maybe another more technical aspect could be the notion of being better connected when it comes to being able to integrate information also from outside of the organization into the process, and then get closer to your more operational, the SNOE level of planning, and even further down, as we're going to discuss in just a few minutes.
So to finish it off, to give you something really tangible, really, let's say, kind of a recipe for success is what we did together with the folks from Yonder. So we combined the typical, let's say, SNOP process that you read in the books that you're being, let's say, prescribed from independent organizations out there. We combine it with the SNOE. So in one solution, in one set of numbers, in one harmony, one tool, we can go 3 to 24 months. At the same time, we can see all of these daily, let's say, fluctuations, which are considered as an important one and which might be changing the plan. So we start with one set of numbers, and then weekly we revise it if the market is hot or if the market is down. And this is all done in one instance, one set of truths. So really, you have this ability to play around the number. Everybody can see the data from his or her own angle and get the same picture. So this is really awesome, and it was really a deal breaker for the success of this solution. And the sheer number of users in Lensing is a testimonial to that, currently more than 150. So this means that we have achieved a status of IBP within Lensing, because everybody is participating: finance, executive, planning, operations, anyone who is really contributing to an IBP picture. Let me tell you straight, this is not easy. It requires a lot of advocacy, a lot of, let's say, sleepless nights, a lot of drinks and schnapps drink with Yonder colleagues, really to make it a success. But my personal experience is because we also opted for the implementation of Yonder. They're a great team. They're willing to go the extra mile and really help you on that transformational journey. Gabriel will continue to talk about the challenges of this transformation, and then what is very interesting in what's next, what they see as the next big thing in the SNOP, and hopefully to give you a glimpse of what we want to achieve in order to transform the industry that we operate. Gabriel?
Yeah, thanks, Simeon. So, so what are typical challenges that you find, right, if you want to get that sort of next level of maturity? So one thing is the going away from thinking in numbers and concentrating on getting the numbers right, and actually getting the focus on managing risk and opportunity instead, which as a facilitator needs the ability to create scenarios, business scenarios. So that's really a big mindset change, because again, the focus is often on getting those numbers right, and as it's a bon mot that you may have heard. It's better to be roughly right than exactly wrong. So this is a kind of what steering the business from a directional perspective. If you look at that typical IBP horizon, month 6 to 24 type. Really what it's about. The next point is really around language. Simeon was alluding to that real quick when he said, look, you have all these different participants, finance and the product guys and the supply and the sales guys, and they all speak a little different language within their daily lives that they operate within. And making sure you have proper translation sort of matrix and inbuilt in your solution, so that information is presented to the stakeholder in a meaningful way for that particular role, is another really key enabler. Modeling financials is super important. This is particularly when it comes to all the impacts that you could have when you think of things like demand shaping, and you want to be able to do elasticities and stuff like that, and do some pricing modeling and see what influence you find on demand. This is more generally speaking now beyond the use case at Lensing. And that's also, by the way, a super interesting area to get into leveraging new technologies. Another thing we need to talk about real quick is, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it is important to just recognize you will never experience that step change in maturity if the process, whatever you call it, SNOP, IBP, I don't care. The process needs to be chaired and accepted by management, and that needs to be within in a culture of alignment and trust. And it needs to be accepted as this is the business management process, right? There cannot be too many processes on the side, too many different angles, too many different stakeholders that are outside of this process. That's another key driver for being able to get to that type of maturity. So from a solution perspective, the way we intend to also go forward, support this is with scale and speed from a solving engine perspective, from a plan generation perspective, with higher degrees of automation to really automate the, let's say, more repetitive stuff, with a personalized user experience, and most importantly, the notion of what we now call boundaryless planning, which is to some extent already realized in lensing, which is something we're very proud of, because it really means you can go up and down and the hierarchies, the product and the location and the sales hierarchies and all that good stuff, but you can also go backwards and forwards in time as per the situational need. And the situational need is another important aspect I wanted to cover real quick. A new concept we're introducing is the idea of situation rooms, which is sort of the virtual equivalent of a Jedi Council meeting, which can be created on an ad hoc basis. So this actually allows companies to step a little bit outside of the cadence, the cadenced planning process, but still keep the RACI intact, right? Still make sure everyone's involved that needs involvement, that everyone's informed that needs to be informed when situations arise that need immediate attention. So that, of course, increases both agility and resiliency in the supply chain. Another element of that is the notion of playbooks. So playbooks are a means of capturing good practices as they emerge. So it's a facility to capture how people actually do work together. So that in a world where we're now entering, where people don't stay in the same roles as long as they did in the past, the good practice needs to be sort of systemized and captured, so that if a new player comes in, that person actually has the chance to just pick up and be effective and hit the ground running from day one. There's a bunch of technologies that we propose to be used in the IBP context as well. One is around segmentation. We're using supervised and unsupervised machine learning in combination to actually be able to more dynamically recreate supply chain segments. And that obviously is one of the key inputs to then actually drive an IBP process from a hierarchy definition perspective and things like that. Just being quick on other things, of course, machine learning can be used for demand prediction. We have very strong heritage here, so we got our own IP in this context. I could spend 30 minutes on this alone. Just take away that it's actually coming from the Large Hadron Collider experiment at CERN, so it has a strong heritage in research, and it's a very open facility in the sense that we're actually publishing all this stuff also for the ecosystem, and it allows us to provide our users a glass box sort of AI experience where influencing externalities that influence the forecast are actually being displayed for the user. So it's not a black box sort of AI. In the interest of time, I'm just going to move ahead real quick. Last thing I wanted to mention real quick is it's not just demand that can be predicted. It is also future plan deviation and disruptions that can be predicted with machine learning, and that actually allows you to not go through a reactive cycle with high speed, and you sort of, in essence, buy yourself some agility through typically putting more stock, but actually get ahead of the game and actually react to events before they happen. So that's the mindset here. There are a few more use cases, automated issue resolution, parameter tuning, analytics, and stuff like that. Again, in the interest of time, we're concluding with a summary, right? So what if you could have some more AI and ML in your IBP process? And what if you could be more agile? What if you could have more interactions across the levels and forwards and backwards in time through boundaryless planning? with that, we're at the end of the time slot. Simeon, any magic final words?
No, I just want to encourage everybody from the business to believe, to have really the guts and balls and the vision to go boundaryless and choose a great partner as we did with Yonder.
Thank you. Excellent. I'm not sure if we probably don't have time for questions. I'm told this is being cut off at exactly 30 minutes, but we will be in the launch if you have any questions.